Hi guys, and welcome back to Interview MedMas Day 15. Hope that you're all doing well, and today's question is on the same theme as yesterday's, ethics and tolerance of ambiguity. Ambiguity? I don't even know how to pronounce that. And the question is, do you think it might ever be appropriate to breach a patient's confidentiality? Can you give any examples? So again, pause the video, jot down a few ideas, and then we'll regroup in a few seconds. Let's first talk about the purpose of this question. The purpose of this question is to really make sure the interviewee understands how important confidentiality is in the healthcare scenario. Confidentiality is like one of the most important things that you have to maintain throughout your training, throughout when you become a doctor, when you're a medical student. You can't talk with any identifiable information about a patient around friends, around other medical students that don't know that patient, around your tutors. Like that's so not allowed, and that's breaching confidentiality, and that's like extremely bad. And so you really need to make sure that the interviewee understands how important confidentiality is, and which specific scenarios is confidentiality allowed to be broken, and even then, how do you break confidentiality? What do you say? So the way I would answer this question is, first of all, talk about confidentiality just generally, what it is, why it is important to maintain it. And then I would talk about the few situations where I think it is appropriate to break confidentiality. So let's do that first, okay? Let's talk about confidentiality. So here I had written that confidentiality is one of the most important things that doctors and any healthcare professionals should respect. And normally, they should never disclose any information about their patient. You can talk about patient X and talk about the case, but you can't say that patient X's name is James and is 31 years old and he lives in wherever. You're not allowed to do that, okay? Again, that's fictional. And then, what is the purpose of confidentiality? The purpose of confidentiality is to maintain the trust between the doctors, the profession, and the patients. You know, patients can be so much more honest and transparent with you if they know that whatever they tell you will never get out and will never be told to other people. You know, if you trust your doctor, you can open up a lot more and get a lot more information. And on the flip side of that, you can get so much more, such better care if you say everything, rather than if you hold back, then maybe you might not get the medication you need as quick as you needed it to because you withheld certain information because you didn't trust the doctor. So that's why it is so important to maintain confidentiality, and that's why confidentiality is so important. Felt that I repeated myself here. And then you would move on to say, however, we've talked about just how important confidentiality is, but it is important to know that it is okay, it is acceptable to break confidentiality on certain occasions and on certain occasions only, okay? And then you would talk about which reasons are acceptable. So the first one on my list is quite basic, but I think it's quite important to mention. It's if the patient has given you clear consent and the patient has capacity, so they're able to make a decision for themselves, that he or her, they are okay with their information being disclosed, okay? So for example, for insurance purposes, patients need to know and understand the possible consequences of this may have. Insurances need to have the confidential information about the patient, and it's only if the patient is okay with that that you can then breach confidentiality and say that. Okay, so that's the only way when that's okay, is if the patient has given you clear consent. Okay, so in that case, you could maybe argue that that's not breaching confidentiality because the patient is aware and has made a decision that they are okay with that. Okay, but I think it's still important to mention that, just to clear up any doubt, and just mention that you are aware that you could talk about a patient while with saying their name and giving their information to people if the patient has capacity and has accepted to do so. The other point in time where that's really breaching confidentiality, and the patient might be aware of it, they might not, but if it's required by the law, if it's required by the court, you do definitely have to abide by the law, and if it's important and necessary to break confidentiality, you have to do so. Usually what you would do is you would go to the patient, ask them to give you clear consent and tell them that this needs to happen. Are you okay with that? If they say no and they decline it, you would have to be like, I hope that you understand that by declining this, I still am required by law to give certain information to the court about your situation, and I will still have to do that and abide by the law. I will try to only give information that is the most important and that is really required. I will not be saying everything, but I just want you to be aware that this is what's going on. So you would try to make the patient aware that you will be breaching their confidentiality, and you have asked and hoped that they would be okay with it, and they would on their own be like, yes, that's fine, you can talk about that. But if they don't, you still have to abide by the law and by the court and breach that confidentiality if necessary. But again, when you breach confidentiality, you only say what's the most important and what needs to be said. You don't talk about everything. If it's not necessary, you don't talk about it. You just try to keep it to a minimum and breach the confidentiality as least as possible. Then the other point in time when it's important to breach confidentiality, if it's in the public's best interest. So if you have a communicable disease, for example, and the patient doesn't want to tell, say the patient just has HIV and they don't want to tell anyone, it could be justified that you have to break confidentiality and tell their partner, for example, if they're having unprotected intercourse, because this could expose other people of the public and members of the public to a disease, sometimes to death. So it's really, really important to break confidentiality in that circumstance. Again, that would have to be something you have discussed with the patient. Ask the patient to do that on their own and talk about it with their partners, with their families, or whatever. And if they still don't agree with that and don't want to do it, then you would have to act in the best interest of the public and breach that confidentiality. But again, trying to make the patient aware that this is something you have to do and that you will be doing. And then the other circumstance that could happen would be for emergency situations. So let's say you have a patient that's in really, really critical situation, could die any moment, and you arrive like in the lift with like the patient on the bed, and you're discussing with the other doctors what you're going to be doing to that patient, the information, the date of birth, all of that. But there's people around that can hear it. That's normally so not allowed. But if that's something that you have to do in the lift to then directly move on to action when you get to the room and hopefully save the life of the patient, that's something you could argue that was it necessary to breach the confidentiality of the patient there. Because if you had not done that, then the patient would have died, or would have been in a, could have died, because you did not discuss when you had the opportunity to do so, and then you didn't discuss it because it would breach confidentiality. But in that situation, that would, I think, be acceptable. For the emergency situation, you might want to look about a better example than this one, but that was just an example that could be used. And yeah, I hope this made sense. I hope this was useful to you. And if it was, please subscribe to my channel, like this video, and share this video with other people, other medical students that could benefit from it as well, or prospective medical students that could benefit from it as well. And I will see you guys tomorrow for day 16. Bye guys.